A few months before our engagement party, I found a secret group chat on my girlfriend's phone listing all the men she wanted to cheat with before getting engaged, including my brother, who she had already slept with. That's when I knew there would be no wedding. Sup, Reddit. My name is Jessica, and 6 weeks ago I was preparing to become Mrs. Derek Martinez. Honestly, I still can't believe we were actually going through with it. The venue was booked at the Grand Bayfront Hotel, an absolutely stunning location overlooking the water. We had ordered flowers everywhere, lilies and roses that would transform the space into something magical. My wedding dress was hanging in the closet like some beautiful ghost, waiting patiently to possess me on the big day. The previous Friday, we had spent the afternoon tasting cupcakes instead of going with a traditional wedding cake. During the red velvet round, Derek managed to get vanilla frosting smeared across his chin, and it was so perfectly him that I almost started crying right there in the bakery. He had been absolutely incredible through all the chaos of wedding planning. Whenever I would stress about the guest list or worry that the decorations were too fancy, he would just pull me close and tell me that none of it mattered as long as I was there with him. God, he was so good to me. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with those deep green eyes of his, and I couldn't help but think about how incredibly lucky I had gotten. Derek worked as an electrician, spending his days dealing with wires and electrical systems. He would come home every evening covered in dust and wire fragments, but he still wanted to hear about my day at the marketing firm. He would still rub my shoulders while we binged Netflix shows together on the couch. Work had been absolutely insane lately, which definitely wasn't helping with the wedding stress at all. Brandon, my boss, had been pushing everyone incredibly hard on this new campaign we were developing. I found myself staying late until 9 or 10 every night, with Brandon demanding absolute perfection on every single detail. I actually admired that intensity about him. There was something compelling about his drive and the fire that seemed completely infectious when you were around him. When Brandon talked about landing major clients or closing huge deals, there was something electric in the air around him that made you want to be part of whatever he was creating. Derek was steady, reliable, and completely safe in every way that mattered. Brandon, on the other hand, was pure fire. And sometimes, if I'm being completely honest, I caught myself wondering what it would be like to get burned by that flame. Is that completely terrible of me to admit? I was getting married in 6 weeks, and I was having these kinds of thoughts about my boss. But it wasn't just Brandon, if I'm being totally honest with myself. There was this restlessness growing inside me. This desperate need to feel something wild and untamed before I settled into married life forever. Don't get me wrong. I loved Derek with everything I had in me. But marriage is supposed to be forever, right? At least that's what we were promising each other in front of God and everyone we knew. The weight of that commitment was starting to feel overwhelming in ways I hadn't expected. I found myself remembering college so vividly during those late nights when I couldn't sleep. I remembered how completely free I had felt back then, dancing until 4 in the morning at random clubs downtown. There had been something intoxicating about making out with strangers at house parties, that incredible rush of possibility that came with every new sunrise. The world had felt infinite then, full of experiences I hadn't tried yet, and people I hadn't met. When did I become so predictable and boring? When did Friday nights transform from wild adventures and spontaneous road trips into wedding planning sessions and vendor meetings? Maybe that's what happens when you grow up and become a responsible adult. But some part of me was fighting against it with everything I had. Last Wednesday, I was sitting in my Honda after work, feeling particularly restless and confused about everything. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I grabbed an old shopping receipt from my purse and started writing on the back of it. I found myself writing down names, men I would love to sleep with before saying "I do," and closing that chapter of my life forever. I should have thrown that receipt away immediately, crumpled it up and tossed it in the nearest trash can. Instead, I folded it up carefully and slipped it into my wallet behind my credit cards, like some kind of shameful secret. It's still there even now, burning a hole right through my purse every time I reach for my debit card. What does that say about me as a person? What kind of woman makes a list like that just 6 weeks before her wedding day? The rational part of my brain knew it was wrong, but there was this other part of me that felt like I was suffocating under the weight of forever. The thing is, I didn't want to be one of those women who looks back in 20 years and wonders what she missed out on. I wanted to go into this marriage with zero regrets, with no what-ifs haunting me in the middle of the night when Derek was sleeping peacefully beside me. He deserved that, didn't he? Derek deserved a wife who had gotten all the wildness completely out of her system, who was ready to be fully and completely his without any lingering doubts. So maybe I needed to scratch this itch once and for all. Maybe I needed to feel that rush one more time before I promised to forsake all others forever. Is that really so wrong of me to want? It wasn't like I was planning to have some serious affair or anything that would actually threaten our relationship. This was just exploration, just making absolutely sure that I was really ready for the rest of my life. The honeymoon was going to be absolutely amazing. We had decided on 3 weeks in Greece instead of Italy, like we had originally planned. Derek had been learning Greek phrases on some language app, and he would practice them on me while we cooked dinner together in the evenings. His accent was so terrible that it was completely adorable, and I knew that was the life I was choosing. It would be incredible, stable, and happy. Everything I had ever wanted in a partner and a future. I just needed to tie up a few loose ends first before I could say I do with a completely clear conscience. I'm Derek, and I had wanted to surprise Jessica by detailing her car this weekend. She had been so incredibly stressed with all the wedding planning lately, working late every single night this week, and I figured I could do something nice to help her out. Her Honda was a complete disaster inside. Energy drink cans and old receipts scattered everywhere, along with crumbs from those granola bars she was always eating on the go during her rushed commutes. I'm not usually the romantic gesture type of guy, but seeing her so wound up and overwhelmed made me want to help somehow. I thought maybe if I could take care of this one small thing, it might make her week a little bit easier. I was carefully vacuuming under the passenger seat when I felt something crinkled wedged way back there. It was just a folded piece of paper, probably another receipt or grocery list knowing Jessica. She was always writing stuff down and then losing track of it later. I almost threw it away without even looking at it, but something made me unfold it first. To do was written at the top in her familiar handwriting, but this wasn't groceries or wedding tasks at all. 5 names were listed underneath, all guys: Tyler, Ryan, Brandon, Vincent, Nathan. 2 of them had little check marks next to them. One was Vincent, and the other was Ryan. Nathan's name was crossed out with a thick black line running through it. What the absolute hell was this supposed to be? I stared at that paper for probably 15 minutes straight, trying to make any kind of sense of what I was looking at. Vincent was my buddy from college, one of my groomsmen who I had known for years. Nathan was a mutual friend from our old neighborhood who we had barbecues with on weekends. Why would Jessica have a list with their names on it? And why were 2 of them checked off like they were completed tasks or something? There had to be some logical explanation, right? I should have called her at work immediately and demanded answers about what this meant. Instead, I found myself texting Nathan, asking if he could meet up that night. I told him I needed to talk to him about something important. He responded pretty quickly, saying he could meet at O'Malley's pub in about an hour. The drive there was complete torture. I kept looking at that paper over and over again, trying to convince myself that there was some innocent explanation I was missing. 5 guys, 2 check marks, 1 crossed out. It looked exactly like what I was afraid it looked like, but I desperately wanted to be wrong. Nathan was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer and looking really uncomfortable. He's usually pretty easygoing about everything, but something was definitely off about him tonight. When I sat down across from him, he wouldn't even meet my eyes directly. Nathan explained that Jessica had contacted him 3 days ago, calling him completely out of the blue to say she wanted to grab lunch together. She had met him at that sandwich place downtown, and things had started normal enough at first, just small talk about the wedding and her work situation. But then she had gotten really flirty out of nowhere, touching his arm when she laughed at his jokes and sitting way closer than she needed to. She had made some comment about how good he looked, asking if he had been hitting the gym more lately. Nathan said he had started feeling really uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but he didn't want to make the whole situation awkward by calling her out on it. When she called him the very next day wanting to meet up again, just the 2 of them without any other people around, he had made excuses and said he was busy. He told her he had to work late all week. She had kept pushing and pushing, and that's when he realized what was actually happening. He had started avoiding her calls completely after that. The entire room felt like it was spinning around me as he explained all of this. I asked him why he didn't tell me about this situation, and Nathan looked absolutely miserable. He said he had been going crazy about it for days, not knowing if he should say something to me or just mind his own business and stay out of it. Nothing had actually happened between them, right? But looking at that list again, I knew better now. Vincent's name had a check mark next to it, which meant she had already been with him, and he had said yes, where Nathan had said no. Brandon was on the list too. Her boss, the guy she had been staying late with every single night. The one she talked about with that strange admiration in her voice. like he was some kind of corporate superhero. Tyler and Ryan, whoever the hell they were, represented a whole lineup of guys she wanted to sleep with before marrying me. Like some kind of sick game she was playing behind my back. How long had she been planning this betrayal? 2 names were already done, 2 more to go, and 1 aborted mission with Nathan. What kind of complete fool was I to not see any of this coming? I had been so focused on wedding preparations and making her happy that I had missed all the signs that were probably right in front of my face. I had to know the absolute truth now. All of it. Every single detail. I wasn't about to be the last idiot to find out what was happening in my own relationship. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I was planning to spend the rest of my life with, was systematically working through a list of men, like some kind of twisted bucket list before our wedding day. Back to Jessica's perspective, lunch with Brandon had been easier to arrange than I had originally thought it would be. I had simply mentioned wanting to discuss the new campaign somewhere quieter than the office, away from all those constant interruptions from coworkers and phone calls. I suggested that little Mediterranean bistro downtown, and he agreed immediately, which felt like a really good sign that he was interested in spending time alone with me. I wore a dress that hugged in all the right places, but still looked professional enough to pass for a legitimate business meeting if anyone happened to see us together. He was already there when I arrived, scrolling through his phone and looking stressed as usual. That was Brandon for you. Always carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. Constantly worried about deadlines and client expectations. It was one of the things I found so attractive about him, that incredible intensity he brought to everything he touched. When he looked up and saw me walking over to the table, his whole face changed completely. He smiled in a way that made my stomach flip with anticipation, and I knew this was going to go exactly the way I had hoped it would. We talked about work for maybe 15 minutes before I started testing the waters carefully. Nothing too obvious or aggressive that might scare him off, just letting my fingers graze his when I reached for the pepper shaker, laughing a little longer at his jokes than was strictly necessary. I leaned in closer when he spoke about the project details, and I complimented his tie, telling him the color brought out his eyes. He seemed to respond to it positively, gradually matching my energy and starting to sit closer to me as the conversation progressed. This is what I had learned about men over the years. They want to be wanted desperately, but they also want plausible deniability if things go wrong. They want to feel like whatever happens between you just happened naturally and organically, like they weren't actively pursuing a woman who was already taken and engaged to be married. So you have to create exactly the right environment for them. Make them feel completely safe to want you back without feeling like they're the ones initiating something inappropriate. It's all about reading the signals and responding accordingly while maintaining that thin veneer of professional respectability. Vincent had been incredibly easy to handle when I had approached him a few weeks earlier. He had always been a little bit in love with me, even back in college when Derek and I had first started dating seriously. A few cocktails at that rooftop bar downtown, some reminiscing about old times and shared memories from our university days. And suddenly, we were back at his apartment, crossing lines that probably should have stayed firmly in place. He had felt guilty afterward, kept apologizing over and over again, saying it couldn't happen again, and that what we had done was wrong. I told him it was just nostalgia between old friends, that we were both adults who could handle one night without letting it complicate everything else in our lives. The check mark on my list had felt like a small victory, one step closer to getting everything out of my system before the wedding. Nathan was supposed to be simple too. I had seen him looking at me at the fitness center during our workout sessions, those quick glances when he thought I wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. But when I called him for lunch, he had gotten really weird about the whole thing. He kept the conversation completely surface level, refusing to engage when I tried to flirt with him or steer things in a more personal direction. When I suggested we grab drinks sometime, just the two of us without any other people around to interrupt us, he made pathetic excuses about being busy with work projects. He started avoiding my calls after that completely, which was frustrating and disappointing. Men can be so dramatic sometimes about everything, making mountains out of molehills when all you're asking for is a simple connection. It wasn't like I was asking him to run away with me or abandon his entire life. Just one afternoon, one experience that we could both walk away from cleanly without any ongoing complications. But fine, that was his loss entirely. That was exactly why I had crossed him off the list with that thick black line. Some people just don't have the courage to take what they want when it's offered to them. With Brandon, though, I could feel the chemistry building between us in a way that felt much more promising. He was different from all the others, more confident, more willing to play along with the subtle game we were both clearly engaged in. When I suggested we continue our conversation somewhere more private after work hours, maybe grab drinks at that new place everyone had been talking about, he didn't hesitate for even a second. Then I mentioned that new boutique hotel outside town, how they had an amazing restaurant upstairs with incredible views of the city. I told him how it might be nice to have a proper business dinner somewhere we wouldn't be interrupted by coworkers calling with urgent questions or demanding immediate responses to emails. He understood exactly what I was suggesting underneath all the professional language, and he said yes without any hesitation or moral hand-wringing. This was about freedom, really. About making sure I went into my marriage with absolutely no regrets and no wondering what-if scenarios playing in the back of my mind. Derek was wonderful and perfect for me in so many ways, but he was the only man I had ever been serious with in my entire adult life. How could I promise to be with only him for the rest of my entire existence if I didn't know what else was out there waiting for me to discover it? This list, these experiences I was carefully curating. They were like a vaccination against future temptation. Once I had gotten it all completely out of my system, I would be immune to anything that might threaten the stability of our marriage down the road. This was creating a past that would never come back to haunt my relationship with Derek, because I would have already explored every avenue and chosen him definitively. Derek had been acting strange lately, though, quieter than usual and more tense about everything related to the wedding. He had cleaned my car yesterday, which was really sweet and thoughtful of him, but then he had barely said anything during dinner. He just picked at his food like something was weighing heavily on his mind, staring off into space instead of engaging in our usual evening conversation. Maybe pre-wedding nerves were hitting him too. Men get stressed about commitment just like women do, right? All the pressure of promising forever to one person, of giving up the single life and all the possibilities that come with it. He would be fine once we were actually married, and all this uncertainty was finally behind us both. I had been thinking about this afternoon with Brandon all week long. We were meeting at that hotel at 4 o'clock, ostensibly to discuss the quarterly projections somewhere quiet without office distractions and interruptions. We both knew that wasn't really why we were there, though the pretense gave us both the cover we needed to feel comfortable about what was going to happen. He had already gotten us a room for the meeting, texting me the number this morning with a winking emoji that made my heart race with anticipation. Once this was done, I would be completely clean and ready for my future with Derek. I would be ready for marriage, ready for the commitment and the promises we were going to make to each other. The list would be complete, or as complete as it needed to be anyway. Tyler and Ryan had always been long shots, just names I had added to round out the number to something that felt substantial. But Vincent and Ryan with their check marks, Nathan with his attempted and aborted mission, Tyler dropped from consideration entirely, and now Brandon, the big one, the one I had been wanting the most since this whole plan had started forming in my mind. I'm Derek again, and the private investigator's report arrived on a Friday afternoon, just 4 days after I had hired him to follow Jessica. I had been sitting in my truck outside her office building, watching for patterns and trying to make sense of what I had discovered, when I decided I needed professional help to get to the bottom of this situation. Tony Rodriguez came highly recommended from a guy at work whose wife had been cheating on him last year. He promised professional discretion, no questions asked, and guaranteed results within a week. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have when I picked it up from my mailbox, like it contained the weight of my entire future. Inside were photographs, timestamps, and detailed activity logs that painted a crystal clear picture of what had been happening behind my back. There was Jessica's Honda in the parking lot of the Ocean View Inn, photographed on multiple different days. There were pictures of Jessica and Brandon walking into the building together, looking comfortable and familiar with each other. Most damning of all, there were photos of Jessica and Brandon kissing in the lobby, and then leaving separately exactly 2 hours later. The same exact pattern was repeated over 5 different days, like they had established some kind of routine for their affair. There was even video footage shot through the restaurant window, showing Jessica laughing and touching Brandon's hand across the table while he leaned in close and whispered something in her ear that made her smile in a way I recognized, but had never seen directed at another man. I sat in my truck for over an hour, staring at those photographs over and over again, trying to process what I was seeing. This was real. This was actually happening in my life. This wasn't some misunderstanding or coincidence that could be explained away with the right conversation. My fiancée, the woman I had been planning to spend my entire life with, was systematically working through a list of men she wanted to sleep with before marrying me. The woman I trusted completely and without question had been lying to my face every single day, coming home from these hotel meetings and acting like nothing had happened. She had been kissing me goodnight with the same mouth that had been on other men just hours earlier. Something cold and calculating settled over me as I processed the full scope of her betrayal. The first thing I did was make copies of absolutely everything. 4 complete sets of all the photos, video files, and the investigator's detailed report. I burned them onto separate flash drives and put each set in its own envelope with carefully written labels. Then I drove to FedEx and sent them out to their intended recipients. The first package went directly to Jessica's parents. Her dad, Robert, who had been so excited about walking his little girl down the aisle, and her mom, Carol, who had been calling me son for the past 3 years. They deserved to know exactly what kind of daughter they had raised and what kind of woman they were about to celebrate at an expensive wedding ceremony. The second package went to Brandon's wife, Victoria, a woman I had met at the company holiday party last December. She was a nice woman who worked as a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital downtown, and she had a right to know what her husband was doing during his extended lunch breaks and late-night business meetings. The third package went directly to HR at Jessica's company. Sexual harassment policies, workplace conduct violations, fraternization between supervisors and subordinates. Let them sort out whether screwing your engaged coworker constituted a fireable offense under their company policy guidelines. The fourth package I kept for my own records, locked away in a safe place where I could access it if I needed additional evidence for any legal proceedings that might come up later. After that, I went home and changed all the locks on our shared apartment, calling a locksmith and paying extra for same-day service. While he worked on installing the new hardware, I packed all of Jessica's belongings into boxes. Her clothes, her books, her extensive collection of scented candles that she never burned but kept buying anyway. I had everything shipped directly to her parents' house, letting them figure out why their daughter's possessions were showing up in cardboard boxes without any warning or explanation. Next was the complete digital cleanup. I deleted Jessica from absolutely everything, blocked her phone number, her email address, and all of her social media accounts across every platform we had been connected on. I deleted our shared Google Calendar that had been filled with all the wedding appointments and vendor meetings we had scheduled together over the past several months. I removed her access to our shared bank account, the one we had been using specifically for wedding expenses and deposits. All those vendor payments, venue costs, and service fees that we had been splitting. She could figure out how to handle her portion of those financial obligations on her own now. I called the wedding planner and told her that I was withdrawing from the planning process entirely, that she would need to work with Jessica directly from now on if she wanted to keep the event moving forward. I did the exact same thing with the caterer, the florist, the DJ, the photographer, and the venue coordinator at the Grand Bayfront Hotel. I didn't cancel anything outright. That would have created unnecessary legal complications and financial penalties that I didn't want to deal with. Instead, I just removed myself from the equation completely and let Jessica figure out how to explain to everyone why the groom was no longer participating in his own wedding ceremony. My phone started buzzing around 7 that evening, with Carol's number flashing on my screen over and over again. I let every single call go straight to voicemail, then deleted the messages without listening to them. I wasn't interested in hearing excuses, explanations, or desperate attempts to minimize what had happened. Jessica had wanted to act single while engaged to me? Fine, now she could be single while dealing with all the fallout from her choices. She had lit this fire herself with her systematic betrayal. I was just letting it burn everything down to the ground. Switching back to Jessica's perspective, I was driving home from work when my mom called, and her voice sounded shaky and weird, like she had been crying for hours. She asked me where I was right now and said I needed to come home immediately. When I asked what was wrong, she just said we needed to talk and hung up the phone without any further explanation. I drove to my parents' house going 30 miles over the speed limit, my hands shaking on the steering wheel because something was seriously wrong, and I had no idea what it could be. The silence that greeted me when I walked through the front door was all kinds of wrong. The house felt heavy with tension and unspoken accusations. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with red, swollen eyes and tissues scattered everywhere around her. Dad was standing by the window, not even looking at me when I entered the room. There was an envelope on the table that had been opened, with papers scattered around it everywhere like evidence at a crime scene. My heart completely stopped when I saw what was spread out across the kitchen table. There were photos of me and Brandon at the hotel, printed emails and text messages between us, and worst of all, that fucking list. My handwriting was clear as day, with Derek's notes written in red ink next to each name. Dates, check marks, question marks, and detailed observations about my activities. Dad turned around, and his face was like nothing I had ever seen in my entire life. It was pure disappointment mixed with complete rage. The look of a man who had just discovered that everything he thought he knew about his daughter was a lie. He asked me if it was real, if I had actually done what the photos clearly showed me doing. His voice was so quiet and controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he had been yelling and screaming at me. I tried to explain, told him it was just cold feet and pre-wedding jitters. I said it didn't mean anything serious, that lots of people have doubts before getting married. I told him I was just getting it out of my system so I could be a better wife to Derek. The words sounded pathetic and hollow, even as I said them, like I was reading from a script that no one believed anymore. That's when Dad completely exploded, his carefully controlled demeanor finally cracking under the weight of what he had discovered. He started shouting about how I had thrown my entire future away for a checklist, how they had given me everything and supported me through every stage of my life. They had paid for my college education, helped me get established in my career, and supported me through this entire wedding planning process. He pulled out receipts and started reading off numbers with increasing anger in his voice. The venue deposit, $18,000. The catering contract, $12,000. My wedding dress, $4,000. The photographer, $3,000. None of it was refundable at this point, not with just 6 weeks left before the ceremony date. $40,000 down the drain because I couldn't keep my legs closed for 6 more weeks until the wedding. Those were his exact words, and they hit me like a physical blow. But then came the part that really killed me inside. The part that made me realize just how completely I had destroyed everything that mattered in my life. Dad told me to leave the house immediately. Mom just sat there crying silently, refusing to even look at me directly. I begged them to let me explain properly, to give me a chance to fix the situation somehow and make things right again. But Dad was already walking toward the front door, holding it open and waiting for me to go. There was no discussion, no negotiation, no possibility of redemption in his eyes. Stephanie let me crash at her place, which was generous considering her apartment was basically a closet with a Murphy bed that took up most of the available floor space. She was sympathetic at first, making tea and letting me cry on her shoulder while I tried to process what had just happened to my entire life. But I could tell she was uncomfortable with the whole situation, especially when I tried to explain what had happened and justify my actions. Word travels fast in our circle of friends, and I could see the judgment forming in her eyes even when she was trying to be supportive and understanding. Work was a complete nightmare when Monday morning arrived. HR called me in first thing, having me sit across from some woman I had never seen before in my life, who read from a script about workplace conduct violations and inappropriate relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Brandon was there too, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor completely and pretend this whole situation had never happened. It turns out Derek had sent them everything: the photos, the detailed timeline, even copies of our private text messages and email exchanges. We were both fired immediately, effective that day, with no possibility of appeal or reconsideration. Brandon blamed me for absolutely everything that had happened. He said I had seduced him and ruined his marriage, as if he hadn't been the one who got that hotel room in the first place. As if he hadn't been flirting with me for months before I ever made my move or suggested taking things to the next level. Men always want to play the victim when they get caught doing something wrong. Vincent wouldn't return my calls at all anymore. Our mutual friends had gone completely radio silent, and I found myself getting removed from group chats overnight. I was uninvited from events and basically erased from my entire social circle, like I had never existed in the first place. I was working at a diner now, waiting tables for the breakfast and lunch crowd at a place that was 50 minutes outside the city. It was far enough away that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew from my previous life, but close enough that I could still afford the commute on my drastically reduced income. The uniform was cheap polyester that smelled like grease no matter how many times I washed it. The coffee tasted like burnt water mixed with sadness, and the customers were mostly truckers and construction workers who left terrible tips. But it paid just enough to cover my half of Stephanie's rent and keep me fed, barely scraping by from week to week. My Instagram account was basically dead now. I had deleted all the wedding-related content, the engagement photos, the venue tours, the dress fittings, everything that reminded me of the life I was supposed to have had with Derek. What was left were just random pictures from before, back when I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted from life. I saw Derek last Thursday, actually, walking out of his office building downtown around lunchtime. I wanted to go over and apologize, to try to explain that I had never meant for things to go this far, or cause this much damage to everyone involved. But what would I even say to him that could possibly matter at this point? Sorry I made a checklist with our friends' names on it. Sorry I thought I could have my cake and eat it too. Sorry I destroyed everything good in my life because I was too selfish to appreciate what I had when I had it. I had thought I had time to figure things out, time to explore and experiment before settling down forever. I thought it was just something I had to get out of my system before committing to marriage, like some kind of psychological cleansing that would make me a better wife. I didn't think it would cost me absolutely everything that mattered. My job, my friends, my family, and the man I loved more than anything in the world. I had convinced myself I was being smart about the whole situation, that I was preparing for a better marriage by getting all the temptation out of the way first. I thought I was being mature and responsible by addressing my doubts head-on instead of ignoring them and hoping they would go away. What a fucking joke that had turned out to be. Now I'm Derek again, 1 month later, and I was starting to feel human again for the first time since everything had fallen apart. The house didn't echo with memories anymore, didn't feel like a crime scene where my life had been murdered by someone I trusted completely. I had rearranged all the furniture, bought new sheets for the bed, and even painted the bedroom a different color. Small changes, but they mattered somehow in helping me reclaim my space. Robert showed up on a Wednesday evening, looking like he had aged 10 years in the past few weeks since everything had happened. He was holding something wrapped carefully in a handkerchief, shifting his weight from foot to foot like he didn't know how to start the conversation he had come to have. When he unwrapped Jessica's engagement ring, I felt absolutely nothing looking at it. It was just a piece of jewelry that belonged to a completely different life, a symbol of promises that had never been real in the first place. He apologized, really apologized, not just the surface stuff, but the deep kind of apology that comes from genuine shame and regret. He said he had failed as a father, that he and Carol had spoiled Jessica and never taught her about real consequences for her actions. He offered to pay me back for the wedding expenses I had covered, which I appreciated but declined. Some lessons cost money, and this one wasn't mine to pay for anymore. I thanked him for coming by, but I didn't invite him inside. Not out of cruelty, just because there wasn't anything left to say between us. He was a decent man who had raised a daughter I thought I knew completely, and none of us had seen this coming. Now we were all dealing with the aftermath in our own ways. Word had gotten out about Vincent pretty quickly after I had shared what I knew with a few key people in our friend group. Nothing dramatic or vindictive. I just let the truth circulate naturally through normal conversations. It's amazing how fast someone can become persona non grata when their friends realize what they're actually capable of doing to people they're supposed to care about. Vincent tried reaching out to me a couple of times, wanting to explain or apologize for what had happened. But I wasn't interested in his guilt or his attempts to make himself feel better about the situation. Actions have consequences, and his consequence was losing the respect of everyone who mattered in our social circle. Nathan, on the other hand, had proven himself to be solid throughout this entire ordeal. He had stuck around through all of the drama, never tried to minimize what had happened or make excuses for Jessica's behavior. If anything, going through this situation had strengthened our friendship considerably. He had shown real character when it counted, and that meant something important to me. My life felt completely different now, less secure, definitely more painful, but somehow more real than it had been before. I had been sleepwalking through the engagement, checking boxes and following a script I thought I was supposed to follow. Get the girl, get the ring, get the house, get married, the whole prescribed sequence of adult milestones. But I had never really examined whether I was actually happy or just comfortable with the routine we had fallen into. The betrayal hurt every single day, but it had also freed me from something I didn't even know I was trapped in. I had been planning a future with someone who didn't actually exist, someone I had created in my head while ignoring who Jessica really was underneath all my assumptions. That realization was as much on me as it was on her. I had been willfully blind to signs that were probably there all along, choosing to see what I wanted to see instead of paying attention to what was actually in front of me. Last Saturday, I was walking through Bayfront Park, trying to clear my head and get some fresh air, when I saw this woman struggling with her dog. It was a golden retriever who clearly had more energy than she could handle at that particular moment. The leash had gotten wrapped around her legs in some complicated tangle, and she was laughing even though she was obviously frustrated with the situation. Something about the whole scene made me smile for the first time in weeks. So I walked over and helped untangle her from the mess her dog had created. We got to talking, and before I knew it, we had been chatting for over an hour about everything and nothing. Her work, my work, the weather, her dog's personality quirks. Her name was Isabella, and she worked as a lab technician at the medical center downtown. She was recently divorced, had an amazing laugh, and didn't seem to need constant validation or reassurance, like some people do. When she asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I said yes without thinking about it or analyzing all the potential complications. There was no agenda behind it, no timeline or expectations about where it might lead. Just the possibility of seeing where a conversation might go with someone who seemed genuine and straightforward about who she was. I wasn't ready for anything serious, might not be for a long time, but I was ready to be honest about who I was and what I wanted from life. I was ready to pay attention to red flags instead of explaining them away when they appeared. Ready to trust my instincts when something felt off instead of making excuses for people's behavior because I wanted them to be different than they actually were. Ready to ask direct questions and expect honest answers instead of hoping things would work themselves out naturally. The wedding that never happened had taught me something crucial about the difference between loving someone and loving the idea of someone. Between building a real life together based on mutual respect and honesty, and just going through the motions because that's what you're supposed to do when you reach a certain age. Jessica had shown me exactly who she was in those final weeks before our wedding ceremony. She had revealed her true character when she thought I wasn't paying attention, and I was grateful I had found out when I did, rather than years down the road when the stakes would have been even higher. When there might have been kids involved, or a mortgage, or years of shared history to complicate the decision to walk away. When the financial and emotional costs of untangling our lives would have been exponentially more devastating for everyone involved. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have possibly happened, even though you can't see it at the time. I had dodged a bullet I didn't even see coming, and now I was free to find someone who actually wanted to be with me instead of someone who saw me as a safe backup plan while they explored other options. Isabella had texted me yesterday, asking if I wanted to go hiking this weekend up in the mountains outside the city. I said yes immediately, not because I was looking for a replacement for what I had lost, but because I was finally ready to see what else might be possible when you start from a place of honesty. When you're honest from the very beginning about who you are and what you want. When you pay attention to people's actions instead of just listening to their words. When you choose someone who chooses you back without reservation, or secret lists, or backup plans they're hiding from you. The future felt wide open now. Scary, but exciting, full of possibilities I couldn't see when I was focused on following someone else's script for what happiness was supposed to look like. Maybe that's what real love is supposed to feel like when you find it. Not desperate or uncertain or anxious, but calm and sure and built on truth instead of fantasy. Built on who people actually are instead of who we hope they might become if we just love them hard enough or give them enough time to change. Based on genuine compatibility and shared values instead of just checking boxes on some societal timeline of relationship milestones. I was finally ready to find out what that kind of love actually felt like.